a flat, expansive opening of land completely stripped of canopy. To a strategist mapping out a combat theater on a sand table, this open terrain represents an ideal grid for clear line-of-sight engagement. However, in the Pleistocene epoch, this space was a structural kill zone. Stepping into the open was an elementary blunder in troop deployment. The precise moment a human stepped outside the shadow, they made an irreversible march order, initiating a sequence of geometric visibility that led directly to physical erasure. The geography itself acted as an accessory to the hunter. One must objectively acknowledge a stark biological reality. The physical architecture of the early hominid was an absolute failure in tactical camouflage. Evolutionary forces dictated an upright, bipedal posture, which effectively created a conspicuous vertical marker that violently disrupted the natural horizontal profile of the savanna. Humans possessed no intrinsic camouflage coating. There were no disruptive coat patterns to dissolve into the shifting vectors of thorny brush, nor a dull, earth-toned pelage to mimic the dead leaf litter of the forest floor. Standing erect in an open space, the human form became a severe visual anomaly, a highly exposed target completely vulnerable to enemy fire, jutting out like an unfortified watchtower on an empty plain. If you are an analyst examining archival historical files, designing battlefield mock-ups, or selecting the precise assets to reconstruct a conflict scenario, the bipedal silhouette stands out as a critical vulnerability. It is a biological signature that cannot be masked or edited out of the environment. Every isolated movement, from the minor adjustment of a limb to the slight rotation of the torso, was magnified into a high-contrast kinetic signal against the uniform backdrop of the plane. It was structurally impossible to blend into an environment where the biological silhouette was entirely alienated from the surrounding geometry. Within this open terrain, the individual was completely stripped of spatial insulation. They became a dead coordinate, an isolated asset completely detached from any defensive cover, representing a glaring vulnerability in the terrain that triggered the immediate execution of the wilderness kill order. To understand the absolute fatality of this exposure, consider the open clearing not as a pasture, but as a fully registered grid of enemy crossfire. The apex predators of the Pleistocene, the saber-toothed cat and the cave lion, did not patrol these zones. They monitored them like pre-sighted artillery. The moment a bipedal unit breaks the tree line, the tactical asymmetry is absolute. The human stands in full illumination at the center of the target area, while the strike assets remain entrenched, completely invisible within the perimeter brush. This is an automated trap. The feline optical matrix is engineered for instantaneous threat, locking on any anomaly breaking the horizontal plane. There is no prolonged pursuit, no warning, and zero operational latency. The geometry of the clearing completely denies the target any flanking options. Tactical retreat, or defensive cover like climbable timber. Before the human can even register the perimeter threat, the predator has already closed the kinetic gap, executing a calculated intercept angle that results in immediate physical neutralization. You are caught in the open, with no support units and no defilade, facing an adversary that has already cleared the distance for a terminal strike. This absolute exposure reveals the profound danger of leaving the protective threshold of the canopy. The presence of expansive, sunlit spaces generated a false sense of strategic control, based on the deeply flawed assumption that an unobstructed field of vision provided a greater capacity to monitor incoming threats. In the architecture of the wild, this was a lethal sensory deception. Standing in the open to scan the horizon was the exact mechanism by which an individual broadcasted their coordinates to every hidden observer in the dark. The light of the clearing offered no protection. It effectively blinded the subject to the threats lurking in the heavy shadows, creating a high-glare environment that compromised human vision while rendering the subject completely transparent to the wilderness. The individual was no longer an active scout analyzing the landscape. They had been categorized, measured, and claimed by the predators watching from the darkness. The open ground did not grant awareness. It stripped away the weapon of secrecy. The ancient wilderness operated on an absolute intolerance for exposure. The open clearings of the Pleistocene became silent monument grounds for countless units who vanished simply because they violated the law of concealment and compromised their positions. They paid with their physical existence to establish an uncompromising rule. Life in this era did not belong to the prominent, the aggressive, or the exposed, but to those who mastered the science of the shadow. Early humans were forced to treat the margins of the forest and the depths of the rock shelters with absolute reverence, viewing them not as confinement but as essential tactical fortifications. They understood that the open ground was a domain of execution, where the distance between being observed and being destroyed was measured in seconds. To step beyond the line of concealment was to invite an immediate, Irreversible intervention from the forces waiting in the dark, a world where the absolute preservation of life required the absolute surrender of visibility, and where safety was found only in remaining a completely unquantifiable variable in the environment.